Hi everybody, and welcome to unit number 1 of this course. Negotiation is an activity that we engage in so often throughout our lives, throughout our day, that many times we don't even notice that we're negotiating. And in fact, it is this issue of not necessarily knowing that we're engaging in negotiation that leads to a tendency to engage in negotiation very often from the gut, to shoot from the hip, to go with the flow, or whatever metaphor it is that you prefer that indicates that we're acting in a reactive mode, we're fitting ourselves to fit in with whatever's going on, rather than making conscious, intentional choices as we negotiate. This week, under the title of Moving from Orientation to Choice, we're going to touch on these two topics and break them down. So the first topic we're going to deal with is the topic of figuring out just when it is that we're engaged in negotiation, so that we will know that when we are in these circumstances, when we are in these situations, we need to turn on our negotiation program. We need to function as negotiators in the room and do it consciously and intentionally. We'll also come to recognize just what it is our from the hip is. What do we mean when we say, I'll just go with my gut? How does your gut know what to do? Well, our gut knows what to do because our gut has been coping with negotiation situations more or less from the moment we were born. And we have been engaging in negotiation hundreds and thousands of times throughout our lives, and we've developed for ourselves a mode of behavior, an approach, an intuition, or an orientation towards negotiation, which we tend to play out in most of our interactions. The first part of this week, and we'll start doing that in this week's initial reflection section, will be to pick apart at just what it is that intuitive orientation that each of us has and recognize it. Because the moment we recognize what our orientation to negotiation is, we will then be able to put it up there and examine it and decide whether we actually want to go with it or we want to do something else. So recognizing it is the key to being able to apply choice. And choice is key in negotiation. And we need to improve our ability to make choices while we are in the midst of negotiation. Now, there are many, many choices that we're able to make over the course of a negotiation. And we're going to focus this week, we'll focus on two of the biggies. And those two biggies are, first of all, should we engage in a particular negotiation or should we not engage in it? Just because we can or have been dropped into a situation in which negotiation seems to be happening doesn't mean that engaging in this negotiation is a good idea. So we have to be better at making the decision whether to avoid or engage. And quite conversely, very often we find ourselves avoiding negotiations when indeed we might be better off engaging with them. If we learn to recognize what a negotiation situation is and what our intuitive orientation towards it are, we will get better at making this first choice of engaging and avoiding. And the same goes for the second type of choice we'll be discussing this week, which is the choice between two fundamentally different approaches to negotiation. One question often asked in negotiation is simply, is negotiation a joint venture of some sort? Is it an activity in which two people interact cooperatively, interact with each other in order to produce mutual gain, in order to do something together, in order to reach agreement with one another? In other words, does it have a joint cooperative frame around it? Or is it something that we do versus one another? Something that we do in a dog-eat-dog, in a competitive me against you way? These are obviously two very different modes of interaction. How do we decide whether it's one or the other? Well, here's the thing. very often we don't decide because, as I've said, very often we make this decision in our gut. We don't make the decision up here. We don't recognize the situation as negotiation. We don't consciously give thought to the question of whether to engage or to avoid. And in our engaging or avoiding the situation, we don't often give intentional thought to the question of should I be dealing with this situation in a cooperative manner or in a competitive manner? So in this unit, we will frame many, many different types of situations as negotiation situations. We will reach in and touch our own intuitive orientation to these situations, and we will focus on our capacity to choose between engaging and avoiding in these situations and between cooperating and competing in these situations. That's a tall order. We have a lot of work to do. Let's get started.